Hey guys, this is Kendall Terry, and this is looking at a continuation of chemistry of life, looking now at the chemistry of cells. Cells are responsible for life. In fact, when we're finding life, one of the things that we say the very basic unit of it is cells. So cells have to be made up of something, and the thing that helps us understand what they're made up of is chemistry, and that's what we're going to look at today in this lecture. This is a continuation of a previous one, so this is section 3 of that, section 2.3 really. Cells cannot function without organic compounds. Organic compounds primarily are compounds that contain carbon and hydrogen. Oxygen is many times thrown in there, but carbon and hydrogen are the ones that are important here. The organic compounds that are essential to biology, or the four what we call biomolecules, are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Let's look at each one of these individually. Carbohydrates, carbs, sometimes is how they're mentioned, have a ratio of a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So for instance, glucose has 6 carbon, 12 hydrogen, 6 oxygen. You can see that right here. So if you break that down, you can say that's a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. And that's how all carbohydrates are. When you're looking at a carbohydrate, if you know one of those, then you can figure out the rest of them of how many carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen it contains. Carbohydrates are the key source of energy for heterotrophs. So that's things like yourself, fungi, protists, everything other than really plants and some bacteria have to have energy, and most of their energy comes from carbohydrates. Now, some will use alternative energy sources, but the majority of them are going to use carbohydrates. Specifically, this molecule right here, glucose. We like this molecule right here. That's a very important one to us. Plants need it as well, but instead of plants having to get it from something else, like the heterotrophs, they're autotrophs, and they're able to make their own food. That's what we call it. And in essence, what's going on there is that they will make glucose, carbohydrates, and then they'll break that down later on and use it for ATP energy. This includes sugars and their polymers. Polymers are long molecules of similar building blocks linked by covalent bonds, and we'll look at some examples of those right now. So when we look at carbs, carbs are made up of sugar. So if we look at a very simple sugar, that's a monosaccharide, or a single sugar. And this is stuff like glucose. We just talked about it. It's a single sugar. Here it is in the picture. You can see it's just one hexagon ring. That's what you're going to see primarily here with the carbohydrates, or you're talking about these hexagon or pentagon type structures. So if you're looking at just one of them, a monosaccharide, that's what you're looking at. And that would be like the very basic building block of all carbs out there. And you've got a couple examples, glucose, fructose, galactose on the screen. When you link two of them together, then you have what we call a disaccharide. Di meaning two, saccharide actually comes from the root meaning sugar. So two sugars linked together are a double sugar. So for instance, sucrose, which is common table sugar, that's the sugar that's in your sweet tea, that's glucose plus fructose. And you can see that here on the screen. Glucose plus fructose makes sucrose. And here is a structure of a disaccharide. Two hexagon structures linked together, but there's only two of them there. That's a disaccharide. There's also a couple others. Maltose, lactose. Lactose gives a lot of people problems. It's in milk. It's one of the sugars in milk that can cause some digestive issues with individuals. And then if you link a series of them together, then you've got what we call a polysaccharide. A polysaccharide, 3 or more of them. Here's 2 important ones. Starch, which is the complex storage molecule for plants, and glycogen, and you can see the difference in the two. Glycogen here, which is the complex storage molecule for animals. So you store carbohydrates as glycogen for a while. Eventually, you'll store it as a lipid or fat, but you initially store it as a glycogen, a complex storage molecule there, a polysaccharide. Polysaccharides have many functions. They store energy for us, like starch and glycogen. And they're also involved in structure. For instance, cellulose, the thing that causes the cell to have that nice cell wall that helps it stand up and helps it keep from bursting if it gets too much water and things like that, is because of the polysaccharide that is in its cell wall. So it helps with structure. That gives it, wood, the ability for wood to be as strong as it is. That's really a carbohydrate that gives it that ability. Next here is lipids. Lipids are nonpolar molecules that are not soluble in water. That's your fats and your oils and things like that. And in animals, many times you might think of it as grease, whereas in plants, we primarily look at it as oils, like vegetable oil. Some examples that we encounter in nature, of course, fat. As Americans, we understand fat. Phospholipids, which we'll talk about when we talk about the cell membrane. And chlorophyll is also a lipid. We'll talk about it a little bit when we discuss photosynthesis. Fats are lipids that store energy, so they're really good at holding on that energy. They make these complex structures that really bind that energy in there, that store it in a fairly good way, unless there's too much of it, and then that fat can become a problem. It's a glycerol with 3 fatty acids attached to it. We'll look at an example of that in just a second. Just checking the screen there. You can have a saturated fatty acid, which is solid at room temperature, or an unsaturated fatty acid, which is liquid at room temperature. Most animal fats are solid at room temperature, like bacon grease. If you're cooking bacon and then when you turn the stove off, that grease just sets up in the pan, that's because it's an animal fat. So when you're looking at glycerol, or when you're looking at saturated fatty acids, you're talking about a solid at room temperature. An unsaturated fat would be in the oils that we find in plants. For instance, you go to your cabinet and you find a vegetable oil bottle or an extra virgin olive oil. Those things are liquid at room temperatures. That's why you can store them in a bottle in the cabinet and you pour it out. It's liquid. Now the reason is because of its the way it binds carbon in its fatty acid chain. So here, these two in this triglyceride are saturated fatty acids. And the reason is because they've got all of the hydrogens that they can have, and everything in here just has one single covalent bond. So everybody's happy, and it's a nice straight chain. It can pack solid on top of each other, and that's why it can be a solid at room temperature. This one down here, though, is an unsaturated fatty acid, and you can see the difference. It's got a double bond here, which means it's missing some hydrogens. That's why we say it's unsaturated, and that causes it to kink or bend. So now whenever it's at room temperature, instead of it being able to lay solid on each other, it's got a kink in it, so it won't lay solid now, and it has to stay in more of a liquid state. The next one is proteins. Proteins are chains of amino acids. You have a dipeptide is 2 amino acids. A polypeptide is many amino acids. Proteins are made up of many amino acids. They're polypeptides. A peptide is the bond that forms between 2 amino acids. That's where it gets its name. There's 20 different amino acids found in proteins in all of nature, from bacteria to fungi to protists to animals to plants. It's all the same 20 different amino acids. And the combination of those 20 different amino acids in any one polypeptide structure will determine the type of protein that it makes. And there's different chemical structures on these 20 different amino acids, and they're called R groups. Some R groups are polar, some are nonpolar. Some are ionized, some like to make bonds with certain molecules, others don't. And that causes it then to be able to fold up and make these complex shapes that make up a protein. The shape is determined by the reaction of the amino acids with water and with each other. So as this protein is being formed, here's the polypeptide chain, then it starts to take these different shapes, it starts to fold up on each other, it starts to combine with other polypeptides to make this real complex structure that fits in certain ways together and it won't fit other ways, and then it has this particular shape, and that's the shape it's going to do whatever function that it's going to have in nature. And these functions are various. You could have enzymes, speed up chemical reactions. You could have structure like collagen that we use in various ways in our body. You could have antibodies that fight off diseases, motion, your muscles contracting and moving, transport like hemoglobin to transport oxygen throughout your body. There's various things, and just a couple. This isn't all of them. There's tons of things that proteins are involved in nature, and I've got some random pictures here to show you some different things. Pretty interesting. The last one is nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are long chains of nucleotides. Nucleotide is the building block. A nucleotide is made up of a sugar, phosphate, and a nitrogen base. A phosphate, sugar, and a nitrogen base. And I like to say it in that pattern: phosphate, sugar, and a nitrogen base, and it helps me remember it. And this is every amino acid, every nucleic acid has this. So you can see here, this is DNA. DNA is a nucleic acid. It's made up of a phosphate, sugar, and nitrogen base, and then all of these are bound together, and the structure they make is called DNA, which is the nucleic acid. There are two types of nucleic acids that store information: DNA and RNA. DNA stores information. RNA transports that information to make the protein. They work together. They're very similar. There are a couple differences, and we'll go into more detail later. Finally, the last nucleic acid is ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. This is the energy storage molecule of the cell. It's a nucleotide with two phosphate groups. So it's a phosphate, sugar, and nitrogen base, and then it adds two more. So it's got 3 total phosphates. And those 3 phosphates pack all of that energy into those bonds. And as those phosphates are attached to each other, they've got a lot of energy in there, and your body, when it needs energy, will break one of those off, and as it breaks that, it releases energy for the cell to use. These are temporary energy storage molecules. It's kind of like cash in my pocket. If I've got cash in my pocket, I like to spend it. ATPs are the same way. That's energy storage, and if there's energy there, it wants to use it, so it's ready to spend it. It's the main energy currency of the cell.